I always thought mindfulness was a bunch of woo-woo pseudoscience, but at today's podcast, urologic oncologist Dr. Phil Pierorazio convinces me otherwise, and he teaches us how we can start using it to make our lives better, starting now. Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. I'm Bradley Block, private practice otolaryngologist, and this show is for physicians looking for personal and professional development. This is everything we should have been learning while we were busy memorizing Krebs cycle. Please subscribe and check out the show here or in podcast form. Dr. Phil Pierorazio, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Brad, absolute pleasure to be here with you.
It's a long time coming. We've been kind of bouncing in and out of each other's schedules, but we finally made it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, two dads, two surgeons. It's tough to line these things up sometimes, but here we are.
Well, you're a urologic oncologist. Calling me a surgeon is sometimes a bit of a stretch, you know, tonsils and adenoids and such. But thank you. I appreciate that. So your credentials, you know, I'm not sure we can trust you here. Med school at Columbia, residency at Hopkins, and now you're a full professor of surgery at Penn, section chief of urology at Penn Presbyterian Medical Center. And, you know, that sounds like a high-powered academic. And yet, you know, you made your way into the mindfulness space, which seems like these are almost anathema to each other, right? How does that, tell us about that juxtaposition?
Yeah, it is a little bit of a juxtaposition. I just say, you know, worked hard in my life, but very fortunate to be sometimes in the right place at the right time. And things have worked out very well. Really happy with the new position at Penn and the opportunities that's afforded. But I think kind of along the path of academics and a lot of the work there, it can be incredibly rewarding, but you can also do, in retrospect, some really terrible things to yourself and sometimes people around you just by working really hard to be quote unquote successful in those traditional academic realms. And so, like everybody else, when COVID hit and I had some time to reflect, I wanted to sit down and think, what can I do to be better? And how can I be a better surgeon, a better husband, a better dad, you know, just better? And I started thinking about more than just the surgical aspects and academic aspects of my career, and ended up settling on mindfulness. It really resonated with me for a number of reasons. It created a platform that validated a lot of the really good behaviors and things I was doing, but then also allowed that foundation to build future direction where I wanted to go, and really just resonated well with me personally.
Let's start with a definition. What is mindfulness?
Yeah, so mindfulness gets thrown over all of the time, and it's most often confused with specifically mindfulness meditation, kind of sitting, legs crossed, you know, arms over your lap, eyes closed. And that is a form of mindfulness, but mindfulness basically means intentionally being in the moment, kind of being really aware of what's going on around you in the moment. And there are three components to truly being mindful. One is an intention, or purposefully doing that. You just don't happen into this, this is a thoughtful process. The second is really being present, kind of blocking out other distractions. And the last part of it is the most challenging, I think, but most important, is being non-judgmental, kind of allowing things to be without passing judgment on yourself or what's going on around you. And those are the three key components of a mindful experience.
Interesting. So I'm thinking, like, when we're in the operating room, right? That's kind of a good example of when we're in our flow state, which is a term that's bandied about, right? Because you're really not thinking about anything else. You're just thinking about, like, what's in front of you, what's your next step, what do you need to worry about, right? You're maybe operating with Zen, maybe not, but you're focused. But that doesn't incorporate the, I guess, non-judgmentalness, and it doesn't incorporate the. Well, sorry, just what were the three keys again?
Yeah, no, it's a great analogy. And when I speak about mindfulness in academic settings and such, you know, there's skeptics, and there's always skeptics, and I welcome skepticism. And for all of the surgeons, I was telling them there is no more mindful experience than an operation in an operating room when it's working well, right? Everybody in that operating room is intently focused on one patient, one problem, one moment. And that doesn't happen in every surgery, in every minute of every surgery. But as you said, kind of analogous to a flow state, when things are working well, you're in the moment. And the intention is there, right? For me, it could be a kidney tumor. For you, an adenoid, as you measure. You've set the intention. You're going after what you sought. The presence is tuning out everything else, not worrying about what happened before, what the next case is, what's happening tomorrow, but being in the moment with the patient. And the non-judgmentalness does come in, right? We're not perfect in the operating room. We may make mistakes. It doesn't mean a surgery goes wrong or there's a complication, but we may not have done something the way we wanted to do it, or somebody may have handed us the wrong instrument, or, there's a distraction or going
you
on.
throw a suture and you need to cut it out. Something simple like that. Yeah. Stuff like that happens all the time.
Exactly. Not beating yourself up over it, not beating the disease state up over it. Oh, this is a terrible tumor. This is a terrible patient. I can't believe I'm doing this. Right. And that third part of it, of losing the judgment, just experiencing what is going on and moving in the correct direction is a really important part of it.
I would argue that it's important to do that during office hours, right? Like, you don't worry about the patient before, don't worry about the patient after, don't worry about the waiting room, don't worry about any pop-ups that are coming up as you're seeing the patient and documenting. But the more that you can be present with the patient, I think the faster the day goes in reality. But also, the faster the day seems to go, but the faster the day also does go, because patients pick up on that. Patients pick up on the fact that you're with them in this moment and not distracted with anything else. And then they recognize that, and you're able to move through the visit faster because they don't repeat themselves, because they know you heard. Now, sometimes they are distracted in themselves, right? And may not be picking up on the cues that you're providing, that you are totally focused on them, and then they do. So it's not like it works like that 100% of the time, but often enough, you enjoy the visits more and you're able to move through them faster.
Yeah, and they're much more meaningful and efficient. And there's two great examples from that. And one is there's actually medical literature here, and there's something called kind of perceived time. And when you sit down with a patient, push the computer out of the way, look them in the eye, really listen to them, you may actually spend 3 minutes with them, but they perceive it as 10 or 15 minutes. Whereas you could spend 10 minutes with somebody, but if you're staring at your computer, clicking away, and never making eye contact with them, they think you gave them 30 seconds. And that's well reflected in Press-Ganey scores or whatever ratings your hospital or system is using. That's well represented in the medical literature. And the other part of that is, we all know, my clinic runs pretty efficiently, but we all have partners or colleagues or mentors whose clinics run incredibly behind schedule. Talking hours behind schedule, but patients line up to see them because they know when it's their time, they're getting 150% of Dr. So-and-so. They know that doc is totally into them, and they're worth bringing their book and their, Sudoku or whatever it is to sit in the waiting room and wait to see Dr. So-and-so, because they're going to get everything that doctor has when it is their time.
Then there are the doctors who run really behind that don't necessarily do that. And if there are any listeners out there who actually have insight into the common practices of doctors who run behind and what they can do differently, I would be very interested. Not that I run behind, but it's something that I'm working on as kind of a side project on how to run efficiently for people who don't necessarily run so efficiently. Yeah. So just,
hey, listen, we all
make sure to email me. No, it happens to all of us, but
we all do.
Sometimes it happens to the same people over and over, right? Like you said, the patients know it's going to be a long wait. And sometimes it's because they have the patient's undivided attention and they let the patient take their time. Sometimes there may be other things involved, and that's what I want to figure out. Correct. So sorry to take things away from mindfulness for a moment there, but we can always do better. So I want to find out what those habits are that can help us.
Yeah. But Brad, you're not taking away from it. It's actually a really important part of kind of the intentional practice of it, right? If you have so many hours in your clinic and you book 50 patients in it, you can't intentionally give those patients your best self, right? You are intentionally telling them you're going to get a little bit of me and I'm just going to churn through as many patients as possible. And you'll get much more efficient practices at it. And one of the suggestions I've worked with people on is, so let's say you want to see somebody every 3 months and your clinic just can't handle it. You don't have that volume capability, but you have phenomenal partners or APPs. Well, yeah, it's hard to get rid of your patients and you really build a bond with them, but say, listen, I can't see you in 3 months. I'm going to see you in 6 months. It reduces 50% of your clinic flow. And just say, listen, one of my partners can see you or one of the APPs can see you. If there's a problem, of course I'll see you. But if everything's smooth, check in with them in 3 months and come see me in 6 months. Or if it was a 6-month interval, see them in a year. You've decreased 50% of your clinic volume. You're giving people 50% more of your attention. And things run much more efficiently. So you can intentionally set yourself up to be more mindful with your patients.
Now, has that also made its way into your home life?
Yeah, it is. And part of the reason you and I have had such a hard time connecting is that we really carve out time and space for our families. And, when I'm at work, I work really hard and I give everything I have. And when I'm home, I give my kids and my wife everything I've got. And I try really to keep the phone and the emails away. I try not to schedule nighttime meetings. My colleagues know
this
that.
is nighttime. What's going on?
We got the books in, we got shower time done already.
All right.
We can make adjustments.
All right.
And we intentionally make adjustments.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. But these are important conversations too, right? And we're working towards our fulfillment by kind of chatting together about these things.
We talk a lot about side gigs on this show. So if your side gig or even your main gig is a medical technology product that you want to pitch, or you're even in the early stages of product development, you could benefit from consulting with Charm Economics. They use government data, peer-reviewed journals, and trade literature to support and enhance your business model at all stages. Whether in early stage pitch deck creation, return on investment modeling, or peer-reviewed article production, they can help. See how Charm Economics can transform your business development today, so you can focus on building your product, growing your network, and implementing your vision. Check them out at charmeconomics.com. Yeah, I find for myself, that's always been my New Year's resolution, right? I'm going to be more mindful of my time with my kids. And, the advice that I always hate, because it's not really advice, is, it goes so fast, it goes so fast. And one way that you can slow down time is being mindful and not being distracted and not thinking about other things, to be there with your kids in their activities. And it makes it more memorable, right? It's more likely to become an indelible memory than if you were distracted by your phone or thinking about work or your podcast or something. But it's always a struggle. I always have to remind myself. Have you come up with any tips or tricks to, to not have to keep reminding myself?
Yeah. Well, for those of us who have kids, as a constant reminder, kids are incredibly insightful and will tell you. And you'd be like, hey, I was at my 8-year-old's tennis lesson today. And I can tell you, if she saw me looking at my phone, she'd let me know after. I'd be like, oh, I saw your forehand was great today. And she's like, how do you know? You're looking at your phone. They pick up on these things and they'll tell you. So ask your kids sometimes. And I guess one of the things that's really important in this, in kind of a mindfulness practice, is identifying stakeholders. Right. And at work, this can be partners or your administrators or whoever it may be, your boss. And at home, it's your wife and your kids and your family, and check in with them. You kind of set the intention with your wife and say, hey, listen, I want to be more present for you and the kids. And every couple of weeks, hey, how am I doing? I said I wanted to do this. You think I'm doing a good job? And my wife tells me when I'm not, whether I want to or not sometimes. But she tells me, and she keeps me honest. And she says, yeah, some days you're doing good and some days you're not. Excuse me. And I think the other thing that really helps is I've started kind of, I just take 5 or 10 minutes before I go to bed at night, and I have a little journal book that I keep at the side of the bed. And I do 3 things every night before I go to bed. One is I just write down 1 to 3 things that happen throughout the day that I'm grateful for. And they're often really simple things. The second thing I do is 1 to 3 things that have to be done the next day. For instance, tomorrow I'm given a lecture at NYU and I've got a doctor's appointment myself. Those two things have to happen. The rest of the stuff throughout the day may happen, it may not happen, but those are two priority things that have to happen or the day's not successful. And it helps alleviate a lot of the anxiety and stress about all of the other stuff going on in your life. You can identify what has to happen. And then the last part is, I give myself the opportunity to reflect on things for the day. If I want to write about good, bad, ugly thoughts, whatever it may be, it gives the opportunity to do that. And I find those three things allow you to reduce a lot of anxiety about the next day. It gets you kind of prepared for it and keeps you intentional. All right, when I wake up in the morning, I don't need to think about what the important things are about the day. I've already thought about them and wrote them down before I went to bed. So I know what I need to do tomorrow, so I'm not going to stress about it. And it allows the day to function a little more efficiently, and it allows you to wake up and have breakfast with the kids, help them get them off to school, because you're not worried about, what you need to do. You've already thought that out.
I like that. There's always journal, keep a gratitude. My wife and I tried gratitude thing, and it just kind of petered out. And, I heard, Tim Ferriss has been all about journaling for a while. I haven't listened to his podcast in, maybe 5 years. Maybe he's not into journaling anymore. These things have been talked about, but I like how you have just one thing, and one thing. It just simplifies it so much. And
yeah, it's like
you're more likely to keep it. If it's simpler, if you lower the bar, you're more likely to do it.
Correct. And you'll find that if you really like it, you may expand things out and you may take it in a different direction. And, and the key is keeping up the good habit. So I also have a rule. Listen, I'm not perfect. This weekend we were visiting my in-laws. We were having a good time. I didn't journal on Saturday night. It's okay. It's not the end of the world, but I tried not to miss Sunday, right? Because then it breaks the habit. So, small steps, little successes go a long way. And, be thoughtful about what you want to do and what direction you want to move in.
So you hear the word mindfulness, it gets you thinking of the whole wellness space. And that is a space that's fraught with pseudoscience, right? How do you prevent yourself from moving from mindfulness into recommending Reiki for your patients? Okay, maybe not that far, but how do you distinguish the benefits from the buzzwords?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And as I said, I actually, I don't know if it's a comment on my actual academic work or that people are really interested in this mindfulness space, but I get asked to lecture a lot more on mindfulness now than I do on cancers, which is okay with me. It makes the conversations really interesting and interactive. But one of the ways I start that conversation, because I'm usually in a room full of surgeons, is that we're so trained and ingrained that things have to be black and white, and there has to be science, and you have to have hard proof. And when there is proof and when there is science, I show it and I make it available to people because I think it's an incredibly powerful tool, especially to help surgeons and skeptics and scientists who think critically about these things understand that there are tangible benefits and where you can measure those benefits. But I also say to people that there's a lot of gray here. And if we can just change your perception so that you feel better about your day, you feel better at the end of your week, you feel better taking care of patients, you feel better kind of at the end of the year, then we're doing something good, because the opposite, the burnout and the stress and the toxicity that people are feeling are just crushing the medical field right now and crushing surgeons. And so I do say that where there is science and where there is facts and where there's data, I will show it to you. But if we can change the way you think and feel on a daily basis about yourself and what you're doing, then we're making a tremendous impact.
So there's some science in there. That's what I'm hearing. There's some, okay, so let's hear it. These are, the physicians we're speaking to, not necessarily all surgeons, but we're all physicians. So let's hear some data. Yeah.
No, there's absolutely science. And, on mindfulness meditation alone, there's science that talks about blood pressure and heart rate. There's a lot of studies in cardiovascular disease, so you can look at some of that. In the physician realm, there are a number of studies, simple studies that basically show physicians who were trained kind of in mindfulness techniques had better patient scores and better patient satisfaction scores, better interactions with their patients. There's actually a number of studies in the surgery realm, particularly at a UCSF. There's a general surgeon named Carter Labaris who's really interested in mindfulness, and she's randomized surgical residents to mindfulness-based training, basically modified some of the mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques into surgical training, and has shown not only objective improvements in scores and stress and emotional capabilities, but they've even done some basic science work where they're showing downregulation in kind of stress pathways in some of these residents. So the science is growing, and it's not strong. These are not New England Journal of Medicine articles, but it's also not pseudoscience. And the data is building that there are tangible benefits in a lot of these realms.
Are they defining mindfulness in the same way as you?
Yeah. So these are actually protocoled studies where there are didactics and, at least in Dr. Labaris's work, where there are protocoled studies, specific training regimens that the residents and other surgeons go through. So yeah, it is, it's objective, or as objective as you can be.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking like sleep apnea, where it's hard to compare studies because, you define success, even defining like, was the surgery successful? Now they're more standardized, but originally, like, how do you define sleep apnea? Interestingly, Aetna doesn't even define sleep apnea the same way as Cigna, and Medicare doesn't define it the same. So like, I would think something that's a little more difficult to define is going to be harder to standardize across studies.
Yeah. And some of these outcomes, to the researchers' credit, they use the objective measures that you can use. So existing questionnaires about stress and emotional, response, and they did not create their own criteria. Let's put it that way.
No, but like the 3 tenets of mindfulness are the same in each. Okay.
That is the basics. That comes from a guy named Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is basically the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction and kind of credited with the Western movement of mindfulness in this country, at least. Yeah.
What are the roots of the mindfulness movement? Like, do they come from Stoic philosophy or Eastern?
Yeah.
Where are they?
Yeah, all of the above. And that's one of my favorite things to do is talk about it. It gets credited mostly to Eastern philosophy, Buddhism and Hindu practices, Zen Buddhism, through Japan. But really the principles of mindfulness exist in our Western philosophies, in ancient Greece and Rome. I mean, it basically is consistent throughout human nature and human society, is this concept of mindfulness and being in the moment. And it's one of my favorite, stories to share, is kind of about religion. And if you take religion, all of the religions, at their basis, they're trying to get you to be present, to be in the moment, whether you're Catholic or Jewish or Muslim, whatever it is. It's about being in the moment and being present, whether it's in the presence of God, whoever that God is. And what's beautiful about who we are is that we all have that same kind of goal, despite all of the diverse thoughts that bring us there. And so it really is a way to kind of think that we are all unified despite our different backgrounds and thoughts.
And it's interesting that our brain is not designed to do that. Our brain is designed for threat detection. What might happen tomorrow? What might be over that hill? Not what I'm looking at right now. So it's an uphill battle.
It is a huge uphill battle. And you're right, evolutionarily, we were made to fight stress, right? To recognize what was a threat to our existence. And it sends off all of these signals that raise your blood pressure and your heart rate and all of those things. And a lot of the mindfulness practices are rooted in slowing all of those processes down, moving from that central kind of older brain of ours back out to the cognitive state and saying, okay, I'm experiencing an elevated heart rate and increased breathing. Is there really a threat going on, or am I just perceiving something? And once you're able to kind of understand and get a little bit of body and mind awareness, it becomes a lot easier to control those things. And that's an incredibly powerful skill. And I work a lot with our young surgeons on that, especially when something's going bad in the operating room. All right, slow down. Your heart rate just went up. You're breathing fast. That's a lot of blood. Slow down, right? Is it a threat to you? No, it's a threat to this person. Let's figure out how we're going to do this safely and help that person out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, the perceived threat versus the real threat, and what you can control versus what you can't control, right? There's some things like worrying about the uncontrollable. There's no benefit. There are only things that are within your control.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yeah. So do you have any brass tacks advice for our listeners? You just gave us some good stuff actually with what you journal at night, but anything else or something surgeons and non-surgeons alike can start doing tomorrow?
Yeah. I think one of the easiest things to do is just think about who you want to be. And there's a couple of techniques and little exercises you can take yourself through, but importantly is the act of actually writing these things down. And whether you like to do it pen and paper, that's how I like to do it, but you like to type on a computer, that's fine too. But put down kind of what are your values? Think about, who your heroes are. What kind of person do you want to be? And are you doing things on a daily, weekly basis that allow you to be that person you want to be or move towards that? And we're never perfect. We're never going to be perfect on every day. We're never going to, never necessarily going to achieve the ideal of what we want to be, but we certainly can move in that direction. And just setting up an intention, moving forward purposefully, I think gives us a lot of direction and lowers a lot of the anxieties that come with being a crazy human like we all are.
Great. That's awesome. I love that. Tell us about Operate with Zen. Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, thanks. So Operate with Zen started once again through COVID a couple of years ago. And it was literally, I sat down and I was really getting into this mindfulness stuff because I had nothing else to do like the rest of us. I was locked down and I already had a Peloton, so I had plenty of physical stuff to do. And I said, I need to start putting these thoughts down for me. I just need to start cataloging these thoughts I have and these mindfulness concepts and how they apply to surgery and how they can help the next surgeon. And it made sense to do it in kind of an audio way so I could just talk through it. And I said, you know what, why don't I come up with a podcast? And if it helps one other person, then it was worth me recording it. And it turns out it's helping out more than one other person. A lot of people are listening, and I appreciate everybody who has. And it's been a really rewarding experience. And one of the things I really look forward to doing, it started as me kind of monologuing about some of these mindfulness concepts. And I learned quickly that people didn't want to hear me monologuing. They were getting a lot more out of some of the conversations like you and I are having right now about what it means to be a surgeon and a physician and how these principles of mindfulness, no matter how we approach them, can be applied to our lives and help us be better people, be better humans. And so it's been incredibly rewarding. Got to meet incredible people around the world, like-minded and skeptical, and people who are, way out there and really successful by all measures, people who are really struggling, people who you think are really successful but are really struggling. I mean, it's an incredible group of people when you start actually talking about this stuff, which we don't do a lot in surgery. It's incredible what you learn about others.
Give us one or two lessons that you've learned from your guests. Give us a little taste of what we're going to hear on Operate with Zen. Yeah.
So I always try and start with kind of people's personal story and how they got into surgery and how they got into mindfulness if they're a mindful person. And I think one of the things I've learned throughout and that we're actually focusing on in our next season is vulnerability. And it's one of the things, not only do we not usually express in surgery, we're often taught not to express vulnerability. But what I've learned from all of my guests is when we get the most out of each other is when we're with the most vulnerable. We talk about the deep, dark moments, whether it's a complication or issues we've been having personally or the struggles we've felt despite growing our CV and getting promoted, that it's not always easy. And being vulnerable and sharing those vulnerabilities, those kind of the soft undersides, I think is really, really powerful. And that's definitely something I take home from every guest. And the second thing, we also try and make it incredibly practical. We're clinicians, we're surgeons in general, and we want to go home with something tangible that we can actually do to improve our lives. So whether it's habit formation or it's journaling or it's, dealing with a complication or dealing with a family after complications. And we try and come up with some real clinical pearls in every episode as well, so that you have something tangible to go home with.
Do you ever talk about this stuff with your patients?
So some of them have listened to the podcast, and I do. And some of them will really say, oh, I really appreciate what you're doing in the space. It's really interesting to hear you talk about that. I mean, I think it's a little bit of a self-selecting phenomenon. I think the people who probably think I'm crazy go see my partners. But yeah, I do get good feedback from the patients about it. And I think, the old mantra that, oh, it didn't matter if that surgeon, well, first of all, it was always, it doesn't matter if he's an a-hole, right? He's a good surgeon. That's not acceptable anymore, right? It's just not. There are plenty of people who are technically gifted surgeons. And the beauty of it is now, it's men and women. It's people of all different colors and backgrounds. It's not that classic Halstedian white male in this country who could be a jerk. And it's not acceptable to be a jerk. And people don't want that anymore. They want someone who's going to take care of them with their technical skills, by being a human, by taking them through some of the tougher challenges of their life. I mean, it takes, I have a surgery upcoming, and I do surgery weekly, almost daily. It is daunting to think about somebody putting you to sleep and cutting into your body.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. And there's, there's the technical side of it, and there's all the space, we call it now the space in between technique on the show. What are all the things we're talking about between sutures and between needle drivers and what we're using? How do you figure all of that out, and how do you take really good care of people? So
I love it. I love it. Okay. So, where can people find you online? Where can they find you on social media, on Operate with Zen?
Yeah. Operate with Zen's basically on every major podcast channel. You can find it on iTunes. You can find it on Spotify. It's hosted on Buzzsprout, but you can find it, once again, just about anywhere. I'm on Twitter, Dr. Phil _urology, real clever name. I used to joke that I had more hair than him, but I'm not sure I do anymore. But yeah, Dr. Phil _urology. You can find me at the University of Pennsylvania, Presbyterian Medical Center up in the west side of Philly. Great little hospital and a big medical center. So yeah, I'm out there, happy to chat with any of you.
And just to summarize, I want to just go through two of your points one more time. One, what were those 3 tenets of mindfulness?
Yeah. Intention, presence, and being not judgmental.
That last one, that's hard.
That's going
to be hard for me.
Yeah,
Come from a long line of judgmental people.
Oh yeah. and where it's easy to make progress is being non-judgmental with others, right? We can give people gracious excuses. It's really, really hard to do it to ourselves.
Yeah.
And to not judge ourselves. That's the really challenging one. But like everything else with practice, you get there.
And then what were those 3 things that you write in your journal before bed?
Yeah. So 1 to 3 things that I'm grateful for that happened in the last 24 hours. 1 to 3 things that have to happen the next day. Musts for the next day, not maybes, musts. And then I give myself an opportunity to reflect. Good, bad thoughts I may be having, something I want to just kind of get out. And it gives an opportunity to just kind of think for a little bit.
And get it out of your head and get it onto the paper. I'm sure it helps you get to sleep too.
It helps a ton.
Well, Dr. Phil _urology, Dr. Phil Pierorazio, thank you so much for your time. And everyone check out Operate with Zen.
Brad, absolute pleasure being with you. Thanks for the time. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks for joining us today on the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. Make sure to subscribe, like, follow, refer a friend, anything that'll help the word get out that I've got this great content that you love so much. So let me know what you, the listener, want to hear more of. So make sure you reach out on social media or email me at brad@physiciansguidetodoctoring.com. The views expressed are those of the interviewer and the interviewee and do not represent the views of our respective employers. Now, if you're still listening after all of these disclaimers, you really must love the content. So don't forget that I'm also available for medical legal consulting in general otolaryngology, as well as keynote speaking. So reach out.